Okay, so this chapter is going to get into, it's kind of along the same lines you've basically been using for creating GUI interfaces, but this one is a little more advanced that there's actually some software that gets installed. I've got all the instructions on how to set up this process called JavaFX. Once it's set up correctly, you should be able to then create a website very easily, a nice GUI interface. Nice thing about this one is it does include a CSS file, so if you do know any HTML and CSS styling, you can actually go in and style it through the CSS and really make your site look really, change the background colors, add graphics, that type of thing. Okay, so it says that it's not required that you know chapters 12 and 13, but it does help. We're going to basically be doing things like labels and text boxes and radio buttons and sliders and talking about all that type of stuff. So some of the GUI components are, you're going to have what's called an anchor pane. So in the other past we've had a J panel. Well, an anchor pane is just like a J panel that we have to have something that we bring stuff into. The best, or I should say the most important thing about an anchor pane is we have to tie something from our code to the anchor pane so it knows to bring that screen up. And there's buttons and checkboxes and combo boxes and labels and lists, radio buttons, sliders, text fields, and title panes. It's also event driven, so when you click on something, the event there is clicking and it kicks off that particular piece of code. So what we're going to be using is this thing called Scene Builder. And this section talks about scene graphs. And so we have our root node, and again this is a tree view. So we have our root node, we have our branch node, and what's called a leaf node. We can have a leaf off of a root as well. So if we scroll down here, we have, so this box is called our anchor pane, and the other ones we called it a J panel. And here we have another pane inside of here. We have a label, we have a radio button, and we have a button. Well, if we were to compare it to this tree view up here, we would see that we have our anchor pane, we have our pane, and then our label, radio button, and then our button. So that's kind of how the scene is built. And so what we're going to do is we're going to give a name to our anchor pane, and then we have a title pane, and then our radio buttons and all that sort of thing. So that's kind of how we're going to be building this application. So using Scene Builder to create JavaFX applications. Scene Builder is a free design tool from Oracle, and which is no longer true. They no longer support the Scene Builder. I have a link in Joule that will basically show you how to download the latest Scene Builder and bring it in. So so what are the components that we are going to be looking at? So let me just bring up Eclipse. And so here I have this checkbox demo. And the first thing you'll notice is we've got some different files in here. We don't have just Java, but we have a Java, a CSS, and the most important thing is this thing called an fxml file. This is the guy that basically is the GUI. Okay, and what's nice is it's tied to this application CSS that we can actually go into and modify so that it basically updates this as well. We have our standard JRE system library jar files, but you'll notice we now have a new set of jar files, and again that's all part of the installation of FX, and again you'll see that in my instructions on how to get that in there. Okay, so we have a bunch of new Java FX jar files that we will be needing as well. So just kind of a quick, how do we do this? Well, we're going to create a Java FX project, and to do that I click on File, Point to New. Instead of getting a Java project, we're going to click on Other, and down here I will see a folder called Java FX. I expand that and I will point to a Java FX project. I will click New or Next. I will give it a name. We'll do the old standard Hello World. I'm going to call it Hello World FX. And I just click Finish. So when I get done, I now have a Hello World FX. Now when I expand the SRC folder, it defaults to an application package. Now do we have to use that? We don't have to, but I just go ahead and keep it. So I've got this main and I've got my application CS. So if I open up main, it has some imports in here. I've got this class main extends application. So application is this is a application that's tied to the FX import. Within there I've got a method called start, and I've got a try because we do have a error situation, so in case we have any kind of error, we basically will throw some type of error. Here's my main. So this is my public static void main. This is what's going to kick it off, and you notice it just says launch args. There is no launch method. What it does is just automatically starts this process up here because of the application and the first method inside of it. So this is basically where it gets kicked off to. If we need a style sheet, notice it's got application CSS, so that automatically ties that into there as well. We do not have a sheet in here, so let me do this. I'm gonna back up a little bit. I'm going to delete this guy altogether. I'm going to delete it completely, the files and everything. I want to recreate it, and I'm going to show you something different. So I point to New, Other, Java FX Project. I click Next. I'm going to type Hello World. FX. This time I'm going to click Next. I'm going to click Next again. And down here I've got this thing called Language. Right now it says None. If I click on the drop down and I click FXML and I click Finish, it creates my Hello World FX. And when I expand it and expand the application package, I actually now have a couple of new items that go along with it. So I got my main, I've got my sample controller, and I've got my sample XML. Now, this is the guide that we are going to edit within our scene builder. And now that I have again, the instructions are in Jewel, I have scene builder attached to Eclipse. So I can actually do a right click on this sample, and I can say Open with Scene Builder, and it's going to open up the Scene Builder application. So it comes up, no big deal. And this is where I can say I would like a anchor pane, so I click and drag that over to here. One thing I can do now, over here on the right hand side, I've got Properties, I've got Layout, and I've got Code. So layout is basically just exactly how this looks. If I wanted this a little bigger, I could type in 300, and it's now a little wider. I can change the height, or I can actually click in here and drag and drop. Oop. Oh, that's crazy. That's too big. Wow, where'd it go? Let me get rid of that border pane. Okay, so let me try it again. Wow. Put it in here. And I'm going to change that to 400 by 300. Okay, so now I've got my anchor pane. Now I want to add some items to that. To do that, I have to click on Controls, and there I can then add, let's add a label. And I can drag that label wider, and I can then come over here and click on Properties, and I can give that label some text. I can say Input Name. Okay. Now just like we saw in the previous chapters, we have to give this some type of an ID so that we can include that in the code. And to do that, I click on this code section, and FXID is how I do that. I'm going to call this label name. Then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to select a text box, which is a text field. Drag it down here. I'm going to change the FXID to name, text box. I'm then going to add another label. I'm going to call this output label. I'm going to make sure the properties has nothing in the text and remove it all. And then I'm going to come up here and add a button. And that button is going to say display name. I'm going to give it a FXID of display name button. Okay. So I go ahead and save this. And so good so far. We'll just minimize this screen builder for now. And what I'll do is come over here to my sample controller. Now the controller is the guy that is tied to each one of those fields. So let me open up the book and I need some code. Okay, let me get some sample code here so make it easy. Oh, I know where to go. Let me go to Eclipse and go to let me just grab the LS. So what I'll do is, well, I don't have a radio button, but we'll call it, well, here's my label. Here's a button, we'll call it, this is called display name button. We don't need we don't have a radio button, so let's call it here's label input, what is it called, input name, label name. And we have a text box which is called a text field. Is that what it's called? Let's see. So yeah, it's called a text field. Okay. Called ID for that is name text box. Okay. Why are you barking? There we go. So again, as you use things, if you need to bring that in, you can go ahead and bring that in. So I wonder, can we do this? Will that work? Yep, that'll work. Okay, so so now we can basically, so again, here is our listener. So this is our event listener, and we can say, make the output label dot text property equal to the name text box dot text. Let's see. Oh, set text, sorry, my bad. Okay, so when I click on a button, it's going to take the output label text and set it to what's in the text box. So I save it. Now you'd think we're done, right? Now we got to tie some things back to the scene builder. So what I have to do is on this anchor tag, so this anchor pane, I click on that. I have to hit controller. Right now it's tied to nothing. So I click on the drop down, and there I have the application sample controller. Okay. I click on the button. I then have to go to the code, and I have to click on the action there, and that is going to be show choice listener. That's what I just happened to choose, and I save it. Okay. Now we're not done, because we got to tie this controller to our main. So when I double click on the main, we have to tie this to something. So what we will then do, we just copy all of this. So we're going to call this the sample controller. No, it's called sample. Capital S. And the title is going to be get name. Oh yeah, I forgot start. Shoot, my bad. That needs to go, because that's the default, so I need to have this stage start up here in front of, let me just recopy it. Okay, so this is sample, and call this get name. So let me save this. So the scene is going to be, basically this is the parent. So this builds the scene. This is going to basically, when it grabs this guy, that's the parent. And when we say scene, it gets the scene from the parent, basically displays it, and it sets the title of that screen to get name, and then it sets the scene. That means it displays it, or basically prepares to display it, and then the show says displayed on the screen. So we kind of like that when we did the J panels. So again, let me see if I can run this, and see what the problem is. Okay, I'm having an issue running this, so if I do a right click on my main and run as, and it basically, anyways, let me bring up one that works. So here is from the book. We have this kilometer. So let's actually go to the book, kind of step through this. So we're going to build this scene builder to create a kilometer converter GUI. Okay. So here's basically how it works. So let me do this, and I'll bring up this kilometer converter. And here's what they had us do. They first had us build this box right here, which is an anchor pane. We then put in a label that said enter the distance of kilometers. If I look at the code, the FX ID is called prompt label. Here is a text field. It is called kilometer text field. And here is the button. The button is called convert button. And notice that the action is it's attached to this convert button listener. I come over here to the anchor pane. If I go to the controller, it is tied to the application dot, because the application is the folder it's in. It's kilometer converter controller. Okay, so that's basically how it looks. So I look at this kilometer converter, and here it has its parent F. So this is where it basically brings in the kilometer converter.fxml. That's right, that thing we just looked at. Here's the title, and here's the launch. So what it does is it brings up that fxml, and then that, when we click on things, brings in this kilometer converter controller. So here is, and this is just like we've seen with when we build our J panels and J frames. We have our button, we have our text field, we have our label, another label, and then we have our initialize. There's no initialize in this case. And here is our listener. This is the event handler. We create a final called conversion factor. We create a string temporary variable called kilometer text field .get. So what it calls str, and we get the information from the kilometer text field. Then I say double miles. I create a new field called miles, and again a temporary variable, and I convert it to a double.parse double. So we take that string, convert it to a double, we multiply it times the conversion factor. So now we have data in that variable. Then I say output label.set text, that string that we just created, kilometer is miles, what we just converted, and then it says miles. Okay, so pretty easy thing to basically run. So when I run this, brings up the screen, I type in a distance in kilometers, I click convert to miles, and it basically puts that in the output label. So pretty simple, not too bad. I mean, it's a lot. You know, we get to go in and actually create and modify this particular screen. For example, I think we can actually go in here while we have this. I can go to the layout and I can say I want the, can I change background? Yeah, I don't think I can. I'd have to use the CSS to do that. But anyway, so as you can see, really kind of slick to be able to create our GUI, drag things around, that sort of thing, and then place it on this, and then just tie each one of those fields to that. So if you're familiar with Visual Basic, this is a lot closer to Visual Basic because I can create my actual physical GUI items and then attach the code to them. Okay, so let's go back to the book. And the next one, so they go right into the creating the code then. And there's a converter class, okay. So let's take a look at radio buttons and checkboxes. So if we come over here and here we have a checkbox demo. Okay, so I'm going to open this guy up in the scene builder. Pretty straightforward, simple item. We got a checkbox. Okay, first of all, we have our anchor pane, and we have that guy. So if I look at my anchor pane, I have that tied to the application.checkbox demo controller. I come over here, I click on my checkbox, and I can see that I go to the code. It has an ID of my checkbox. Here I do have a label. It's called output label, and here's my button. It's called OK button. The OK button is tied to the OK button listener method. So this is the event handler. This guy is not tied to anything. Okay, so this pretty much this checkbox demo, not much different between this and any of the other items. We basically get our parent, we then tie a scene to the parent, we set the title, we set the scene, and then we display the scene. Okay, not too bad. When I click on a button though, it's going to then execute the code inside of here. So this is where we have our checkboxes. So these are our instance variables. Notice it does automatically create these fxml parameters on top that lets us know that that's tied to fxml. And then here is our listener. It says if the checkbox is selected, we display in the output label the checkbox is selected, else we put in there the checkbox is not selected. So if I run this, it brings up that box. I click OK. It says checkbox is selected. Uncheck it. Checkbox is not selected. Okay. Now if I go back to my scene builder, and if I select the checkbox and I go to the properties, is it properties or layout? Maybe it's properties. Oh, here it is. I can make it selected, so automatically has a checkbox or check mark inside of it automatically. Okay, so we can do that as well. Okay. The next thing we have is this checkbox event handler. So instead of having a button to show that it's checked, we can have an event handler, which we're very, very familiar with. So if we look at that, so here's our checkbox listener. It says if my checkbox is selected, we change the label, else we don't change the label. And so the checkbox is now tied to the listener, as opposed to the button in the last one was tied to the listener. The checkbox itself is tied to the listener. So if I open it up with the scene builder, and I click on the checkbox, and I go to the code, we see that it is tied, the action is tied to the listener itself. So now when I run this, again, this is not any different than any of the others. You can kind of pretty much copy this main, this check this event, and just change it to however you need it. Run it. So again, as the event changes, as the object changes, the event handler is executed automatically. So here's a radio button. So if we take a look at the radio button, here's what we have. Open up Scene Builder, and whenever you create radio buttons, it automatically creates, remember how we have to group the radio buttons in a group? It automatically is tied to a group. So if I were to click on this first guy, it's right here is a toggle group, and it automatically, so if we have multiple, we'll need to make sure we rename those automatically, and automatically created that my toggle group. So here I have these 3 items, and in this first one I went ahead and made it selected. If I uncheck that, it's not selected. Check it, that defaults to selected. I have a label. It's called output label. Again, not tied to anything. And here's my button choice, and it's tied to the show choice listener. Anchor pane is tied to the application.radio button demo controller. Okay, so when we click on something, it knows where to get that code from. So I click on the run button. So when I click show choice, it says vegan. Click on that, vegetarian. Click on that, carnivore. And we can do the same exact thing. We can use what's called a radio button event. So when it's the same exact code, except for the radio buttons themselves are tied to this is tied to the vegan listener. This guy is tied to the vegetarian listener. This guy is tied to the carnivore listener. And notice we don't have actually any of them selected. I click on the label. There's my output label, not tied to anything. My anchor pane is tied to the application.radio button event controller code. So if I look at my radio button event controller code, I have 3 listeners, one for the vegan, one for the vegetarian, and one for the carnivore. And each of those I'm checking. The only thing I'm worried about is it selected. If it's selected, I display something. If not, I don't do anything. So if I were to run this, it comes up. When I click on vegan, it shows vegan, vegetarian, carnivore. So pretty simple. This next one is kind of a fun one in that it's an image viewer. Okay. Now what I've done is I just went ahead and copied, I just dragged the cat and the dog and I dropped it right in the application. So it basically is inside the same folder. And this guy's a little different. Let me open up the Scene Builder. And that it basically is what is called an image viewer. So if I were to come here to the controls, there's one called an image viewer. I created 2 radio buttons, one called dog, one called cat. Now what I would do is I'm going to click on the dog. I'm going to go ahead and unselect the dog because it doesn't do anything. I have the dog unchecked because I want to be able to, if it's checked, I'd have to put some extra code in to automatically do that, but I'm going to leave it unchecked. You notice that if I were to look at the code, it basically is tied to the dog radio button listener. The cat is tied to the cat radio button listener. This guy is tied to nothing, and the anchor pane is tied to the application.imageView demo controller. Okay, so since I made that change, I'm going to save it. I'm going to close it. And if we look at the controller, again, not much different than anything. The only thing I've got extra now is I have a private image, dog image, and private image, cat image. I got initialization. I say the dog image is equal to a new image dog. So I'm tying that dog image to the dog image variable, and I'm tying the cat image to the actual cat.jpg to the cat image variable. Here's my dog listener. If the dog listener is selected, my image, which happens to be an image view field, not field but a box, I'm going to tie that to the dog image. Else, if the cat is selected, I tie the cat image to my image. Okay, so pretty neat stuff. So I run it. Here's my box. I select cat. There's my cat. I select dog. There's my dog. Okay, there's my dog and my cat. As simple as that. Okay, and the reason, I mean, if I had this image somewhere in a specific path, I would have to put that in this path statement right here. But if it just says dog.jpg, it's expecting to be in the same exact folder this code is in right now as well. I think that's about it. So there's the image viewer. Yeah, so as you can see, it almost seems easier to use than the J panels and the J frames and all that, because we kind of get to design our GUI and then we attach the code to each one of those objects. So it's really slick, a lot of fun. If you have any problems, again, give me a call, give me a yell. We can Skype, and I can kind of see your screen and help you along. Okay, we'll see you next time.